Tonight, the tariff roller coaster and what it means for you. And is there any relief in sight?
Your reaction to the markets today, and would you be open to a pause in tariffs to allow for negotiations?
Well, we're not looking at that.
Trump stands his ground on tariffs as millions of Americans are worried about the future of their 401ks as the value of those retirement plans is shrinking by the day. What you can do right now if you're concerned. Plus,
how big of a problem is this? By sheer number of people impacted, I think that we're on a trajectory to see the worst epidemic of addiction that the world has ever seen.
He's talking about sports gambling. More than 36 states currently allow it, and it's causing some to lose their life savings. Tonight in our Prime Focus, our in-depth look at the rise in gambling on live sports and advice former gambling addicts have for those who are getting caught up. And
up at 2, we might have guys starting to move in our position.
Copy. We're getting a buildup of activity here, too.
It's been billed as one of the most intense and unflinching war films in recent memory, and it's all inspired by an actual covert mission in Iraq. We're joined by the film's directors in studio. New parents at 100 years old? Yes, it happened at the Philadelphia Zoo. We'll tell you all about it.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is Prime with Linsey Davis.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Linsey Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. We do begin with more turmoil and chaos on Wall Street amid President Trump's tariff fallout and no clear end in sight. And the major concern for millions of Americans that their retirement plans, those 401ks, are plummeting in value. All three major indexes in the red for a third straight day after a day of roller coaster trading, down 3% or more before ultimately climbing back. Tonight, despite calls for the president to reverse course on what many are calling disastrous tariffs, the White House is holding firm, saying dozens of countries are trying to negotiate deals. This comes as the president threatened China with an additional 50% tariff unless China backs down from their retaliatory tariff before it goes into effect on Wednesday. There is a lot to get into tonight, including a 401k advisor with the questions you may have. But we begin our team coverage with ABC's Whit Johnson reporting tonight from Wall Street.
Tonight, another wild day on Wall Street. The Dow with its largest point swing ever in one day, from 1,700 points down, then swinging up more than 2,500 points, and then back, ending the day down nearly 350 points. All of this driven by President Trump's tariffs and growing uncertainty about whether there could be any off-ramp. Investors and millions of nervous Americans over higher prices and shrinking 401ks, waiting to hear if President Trump would pause or rethink the strategy. Our Mary Bruce asking the president.
Your reaction to the markets today, and would you be open to a pause in tariffs to allow for negotiations?
Well, we're not looking at that. We have many countries that are coming to negotiate deals with us, and they're going to be fair deals.
So far, the White House only talking about Japan engaged in any kind of active negotiation. The president posting on social media he spoke with Japan and then brought it up in the Oval Office as progress.
And I said, one thing, you're going to have to open up your country because we sold no cars, like 0 cars in Japan, and they sold millions of cars into our country.
But Japan is just one of many countries slapped with steep tariffs by the president. And tonight, President Trump appears to be willing to escalate this trade war with China. Trump hitting China with an additional 34% tariff. And then China retaliating with 34% tariffs of their own. President Trump tonight says China has until tomorrow. If China does not withdraw that tariff, the U.S. will increase tariffs on China by another 50%, bringing the tariffs on China effectively to more than 100%. The market hanging on the president's every word. This is a snapshot of the Dow since President Trump's inauguration, after dropping more than 15% since its record high, putting it into correction territory. Today, the Dow with dramatic swings when trading began, dropping significantly, then sharply rising after a false post on social media gave investors hope that the president was considering a 90-day pause, only to sink again when the White House said the post was not true. And tonight, a hedge fund billionaire and vocal Trump backer during the election now saying this isn't what we voted for. Hedge fund manager Bill Ackman is urging the president to call a timeout, warning, we are heading for a self-induced economic nuclear winter, and we should start hunkering down, may cooler heads prevail. And JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon warning in his annual letter to shareholders, the recent tariffs will likely increase inflation and are causing many to consider a greater probability of a recession, his firm already raising the risk of recession to 60%.
If this continues on the path it is, without any pause or any kind of a negotiation, we are going to see this, and the implications could be major.
Americans like retired auto worker Jim Peterson from Michigan worried about their 401ks.
There's nothing I can do. I'm just watching it crash. Yeah, it's very alarming.
And now some Republicans in Congress feeling the pressure back home, looking to rein in the president's tariff authority. 7 Republican senators, including the former Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, signing on to a bipartisan bill that would require the president to notify Congress of new tariffs that Congress would need to approve within 60 days. A similar bill in the House, brought by moderate Nebraska Republican Don Bacon, neither likely to pass, and President Trump saying he would veto it. From farm country to Main Street, Americans on edge. Tony Thompson is a 4th-generation farmer in Iowa.
Putting tariffs on that, like when margins are already tight, we're increasing the stress on us as growers.
Louise and Vance Emke have been farming in western Kansas for over 50 years.
Where are we going? Everybody's asking that. Where are we going?
Yeah, it seems that is the general consensus. Whit Johnson joins us now from outside the New York Stock Exchange. Whit, what's the Treasury Secretary saying about countries wanting to negotiate?
Yes, Lindsay, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says that up to 70 countries now have approached the Trump administration eager to discuss these tariffs. But he says that President Trump wants to achieve maximum negotiating leverage, and then he says he may be willing to talk. Lindsay?
So could be some time still. All right. Whit Johnson, our thanks to you. Joining us now is Michael Learsh, head of advice and planning at Wells Fargo. Michael, thanks so much for coming on the show. Let's just start with, for the millions of Americans who are watching their retirement savings bleed out, seemingly, what do you say to them right now? What's the best way to protect their 401k?
So when you're thinking about your 401k, you want to do 3 things, Lindsay. The first is make sure that you have money outside of your 401k. So you might think of that as your operating cash or access to money. So that's number 1. Number 2, revisit your contribution. Now, when you think of your contribution, is it sustainable? Is it giving you enough money outside your 401k? Because what you don't want to do is go into your 401k, take out the money, which might cause you to incur some penalties, and worse, lock in losses that may be temporary. And then the third piece here really is to revisit your risk. So if you feel like you're not well diversified enough, or that you need to change your allocation based on the time horizon you have either in or toward retirement, now is the time to take a second look and say, am I comfortable with these risks, and are they commensurate with what I'm trying to accomplish for my retirement?
And what's interesting is you have a PhD in cognitive psychology. It sounds like there are really typically 2 types of behavioral responses in times like these. Explain that for us.
So typically human beings almost act like light switches, Lindsay, where when you go through a time of uncertainty like this, the light switch is on. And so you want to take action, and they call that action biased. So no matter what, I want to feel in control. So I'm going to take some action. On the other side of it, other human beings go to off, and they call it the ostrich effect, where you stick your head in the sand and you try to avoid everything. You don't watch, Lindsay, the news. You don't look at your account values, nothing. And what I would say is, human beings should take a more evaluative and balanced approach. Look at your goals, what you're trying to accomplish, the target dollar amounts you want in your retirement. Again, is it commensurate with the risks that you're taking so you can achieve your desired income in retirement? Take a look at that rather than what's going on in the markets today.
With all the uncertainty, you also say that this may be the best time for Americans to really evaluate their financial goals. How so?
So people can evaluate their financial goals in a number of ways, but the key one is to think about, when am I going to retire? And if I'm already retired, how long do I expect to be retired? So what do I think my longevity is? And not just for yourself, but for a spouse or a partner. And ultimately ask yourself, do I have the income between Social Security, IRAs, your employer plan, like a 401k? Do I have enough money to feel confident in my future, or do I need to make some adjustments? in my spending plan or in my investment plan to get to where I want to go. So I really encourage people to take that approach. Again, much more evaluative, much more goals-based rather than looking at market movements.
Very helpful. All right, Michael Learsh, we thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you, Linsey.
New home prices are expected to rise as a result of the trade war. The National Association of Home Builders says President Trump's tariffs are estimated to increase costs by more than $9,000 per home as costs rise for materials like steel, aluminum, and copper. ABC's Jacqueline Lee joins us now from Raleigh, North Carolina, where she's speaking with realtors, home buyers, and construction professionals. So, Jacqueline, how could tariffs transform ultimately how home builders do business?
Linsey, it's really going to come down to sourcing. So, for example, tile. We use tile in our backsplashes and in our bathrooms, but many times it is imported from abroad. So this tile specifically is made in Spain. That's where you're going to see the costs go up. But the other thing that we're seeing when it comes to building houses is those small little products you don't think about. So, for example, this is a drain assembly that goes into your sink. It's actually made in China. It's an American company that's selling it, but it was actually distributed from Canada. Linsey.
Oh, very interesting. And how are first-time home buyers reacting and feeling about the housing market?
What's interesting about this is first-time home buyers tell us they're actually not worried about tariffs impacting their ability to buy a home. They said they have not seen home prices rise directly as a result of tariffs, and they feel pretty steady with their jobs and with their income. So they say, because I don't see the impact when it comes to putting an offer on a house, they say they're not concerned whatsoever. Linsey.
So ultimately, long-term, how could home building and the housing market change as a result of tariffs?
Right now, home builder confidence is the lowest it has been in months, and that is tied directly in with consumer confidence, which we know is very low considering what we're seeing in the stock market. So what happens is if home buyers do end up pulling back, because this is a massive purchase when you buy a house, builders are not going to be building as many houses because they know they're not going to sell them, and that's going to only exacerbate the low home supply that we're dealing with. Linsey.
All right, Jacqueline Lee Forrest, thanks so much. And breaking news now, the Supreme Court has decided to allow President Trump to resume deportations of alleged Venezuelan gang members under the Alien Enemies Act. This comes on the heel of the court pausing a lower court order requiring the Trump administration to return a wrongly deported Maryland man by midnight tonight. Devin Dwyer covers the courts and joins us now. Devin, break down that Alien Enemies Act for us.
Some significant news from the court tonight, Linsey, in a 5-4 decision, as you said, allowing the president to resume deportations of alleged Venezuelan gang members under the Alien Enemies Act. That's that wartime act from 1798 that was last used during World War II to inter Japanese Americans. Remember, this was the law that the president used to send 2 plane loads of alleged gang members to El Salvador a couple weeks ago. Many of those members on those planes, Linsey, received no due process. They didn't have a chance to challenge their detention, much less their removal. Many of them said they weren't even gang members. Most of them did not have criminal records. They challenged in federal district court in Washington the illegality of this. Of course, Judge Boasberg, the district judge who's overseeing that case, has been a target of President Trump and other allies, putting that restraining order on those flights, halting them temporarily. And a short time ago, Linsey, the Supreme Court, now overruling Judge Boasberg, says basically that those challengers brought their challenge in the wrong courthouse. This was a decision based largely on jurisdiction rather than substance. It was 5-4. The 4 dissenting justices were the 3 liberal justices and conservative Justice Amy Coney Barrett. But what this means in practice, Linsey, is that the Trump administration can now use this wartime act to expedite removals of Venezuelans. That said, the Supreme Court, interestingly, did plant a flag for due process. While the court sided with President Trump, they made clear that anyone detained and put on an airplane to El Salvador has to first be given notice, and second, has to be given a reasonable amount of time. That's the court's words, to challenge their removal to another country before they can be sent south. So that is sort of a bit of a hedge on Trump's power here, but make no mistake, this is a significant win for the president, and one that is being lamented tonight by the conservative justices. Justice Sotomayor, in a dissent, said that the government's conduct in this case, sending those airplanes south with those migrants a couple weeks ago with no due process, she calls it an extraordinary threat to the rule of law. And she says the Supreme Court tonight has violated the best traditions of this country, and that is why the court's so narrowly divided in that dissent in this case, Lindsay.
Devin, before we let you go, let's talk about Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland man who was wrongly deported to El Salvador. What does this mean for him?
Well, it means that he will remain there now for the time being with this administrative stay in this case. Now, we should say, as you said at the top, that the Supreme Court has not yet taken a position on whether or not the government needs to bring him back. But the fact is that any delay, if he is wrongly, being held there, is significant to him and his family, and certainly an affront to the rule of law. The government, in this case, does not contest the facts. It was a mistake that this man from El Salvador, who, was out freely, approved by a court in the United States, was swept up recently and sent south, that was all a mistake. But the real question now, Lindsay, is what is the government going to do about it? The Trump administration has not offered an answer to the court. The court put a deadline for tonight. The Supreme Court said maybe that was too aggressive. They hit pause. And so they're going to try to decide what they're going to do in this case. I expect some action from the Supreme Court later this week. But in the meantime, that gentleman, Mr. Garcia, is still in El Salvador, a place, by the way, Lindsay, that a federal judge said he should not be sent because of fear of persecution because of who he is.
All right, very interesting there. Devin Dwyer, our thanks to you. That relentless and violent multi-day storm that killed at least 21 people is now heading east. The system spawned more than 150 reported tornadoes in the past week, and severe weather in the southeast again today. Rivers are still rising from Texas to Ohio. A dock smashed into a bridge in Frankfort, Kentucky. Crews used heavy equipment and boats to rescue more than 60 people from a flooded hotel in Louisville. ABC's Alex Perez reports tonight from Kentucky.
Tonight, after more than 150 reported tornadoes and more than 15 inches of rain in some spots, a slow-motion disaster playing out in the heartland. First responders in Louisville using front-end loaders and boats to rescue more than 60 people trapped in a hotel this morning.
Don't drive through water. If you're told to evacuate, evacuate.
Watch as the Kentucky River carries this dock right into the Capitol Avenue Bridge in Frankfort. Swollen rivers engulfing neighborhoods. James Cornish evacuated his dad and other family members from Frankfort's Bell Point neighborhood Sunday.
It just happened, it just came up so quick.
Overnight, fire crews in Columbus, Indiana, rescuing a dozen from floodwaters there. In the town of Hardy in northeast Arkansas, the devastating aftermath: homes knocked from their foundations, vehicles trashed, and roads washed away. The death toll rising throughout the region. At the Bull Creek Golf Course in Midland, Georgia, a father and son were killed by a falling tree they had taken shelter under during the storm. 2 of the more than 20 deaths reported from this system.
Our thanks to Alex Perez. Now a cold blast is triggering frost and freeze alerts across the east. ABC's chief meteorologist Ginger Z is here to time it all out for us. Hey, Ginger.
Yes, in the wake of that powerful front, more than 500 tornado warnings in less than a week. And now you look at the map and you say, no way, it's still with us. And yes, for a couple of hours, we still have a severe thunderstorm watch, Fayetteville, Wilmington, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. But then once this front finally leaves, we have to look at what it left behind. It was more than 15.5 inches of rain that inundated parts of western Kentucky with their wettest 4-day period on record. And it doesn't stop there. Even after the rain stops falling, you're going to have flood warnings. And all of those are on the map from southern Indiana right through Illinois and Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, too, because it takes a couple days sometimes for those to crest or at least to recede. So those flood warnings will stay up. And then that frost and freeze behind that front, it gets downright chilly. Sub-freezing from New York City on Wednesday morning. Louisville will go to that freezing mark and even below tomorrow at 28. And Atlanta dropping into the low 40s. Lindsay.
I'm just waiting for it to feel like spring, Ginger. Is that so much to ask?
No, you gotta just be patient.
All right, we will wait. Thank you so much. The measles outbreak has now claimed the life of a second unvaccinated child in Texas. An otherwise healthy 8-year-old named Daisy with no underlying health conditions was buried on Sunday, and Health Secretary RFK Jr. was there for her funeral. Maria Villarreal reports from Lubbock, Texas tonight.
With cases of the measles surging, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. traveling to Texas for the funeral of 8-year-old Daisy Hildebrand, the second unvaccinated child to die of the measles during the state's worst outbreak in 30 years. Vaccine experts say it's avoidable.
Vaccination is how we could have protected our children so that we would not have had the first 2 childhood deaths.
In Texas, Kennedy, a longtime vaccine skeptic who has faced criticism for downplaying the risk of measles, appeared to offer support for the vaccine, saying the most effective way to prevent the spread of measles is the MMR vaccine. But Kennedy himself previously promoted supplements with vitamin A to prevent and treat measles.
Also, cod liver oil, which has high concentrations of vitamin A and vitamin D.
Health officials warn vitamin A does not prevent measles after a handful of hospitalized children showed toxic levels.
Dosages of vitamin A should be done, under the care of a physician. This is not something where people should be going to, the local pharmacy and running and picking up vitamin A to give to their children.
In Lubbock, the owner of this daycare is scrambling to stop the spread and wants quicker testing.
We need to know as soon as possible that these kids are positive or negative.
Our thanks to Maria. Tonight, the president also with a surprise news on Iran. He announced the U.S. will soon hold direct talks with Tehran about its nuclear program, the first since Trump himself in 2018 exited the Obama-era nuclear deal. Let's bring in our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce. So, Mary, why rekindle a nuclear deal now after the president scuttled the original one 7 years ago?
Hey, Lindsay, it's a good question, but the president and this administration feel that Tehran is nearing the possibility of having a nuclear weapon, that this could be pushed over the edge soon. And they feel that President Trump is uniquely positioned to try and pressure them to make a deal and to do it soon. We did hear the president today not rule out the possibility of military action if talks failed. So making it clear they're serious about making a deal, Lindsay.
And it seems the president is kind of taking the carrot and stick approach here, saying Iran will be in great danger if these negotiations don't succeed. What might he mean here?
Yeah, not a lot of subtlety to this one. Look, the president said these high-level talks will begin on Saturday. He again insisted that Iran cannot be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon. And when asked point blank, well, would the U.S. be willing to take military action if these talks failed? The president said and threatened if the talks aren't successful with Iran, I think Iran is going to be in great danger, adding, I actually think it will be a very bad day for Iran if that's the case. He didn't elaborate beyond that, but certainly, again, he isn't ruling out the possibility of military action by the U.S.
Very interesting. All right, Mary Bruce from the White House for us. Thanks so much, Mary.
Thank you.
The administration says it's revoking more visas for international students. The State Department has revoked hundreds of visas so far, many of them held by college students alleged to have participated in activities advocating for Palestinians. And over the weekend, Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced sweeping action to revoke all visas held by South Sudanese passport holders. One of those possibly impacted Duke University freshman Kaman Maluwach, one of the stars from this season's March Madness tournament. We're tracking several headlines around the world. A major fire erupts in Paris, causing smoke to be seen above the city's skyline. Hundreds of firefighters were called to the scene of a waste disposal center. Officials say the fire started underground and then spread throughout the building, ultimately destroying it. Prosecutors in Costa Rica filed charges against the country's president, Rodrigo Chavez, and its culture minister, Jorge Rodriguez. They're accused of using $32,000 in developmental bank funds to buy a home for a former presidential advisor. President Chavez and Rodriguez face up to 8 years in prison if convicted. Neither immediately responded to requests for comment. Thousands of refugees from Afghanistan are leaving Pakistan as the country intensifies its deportation campaign, forcing undocumented Afghans to leave, many of whom have lived there for decades. Pakistan's Interior Ministry warned last month that deportations would start at the beginning of April for those who are undocumented, as well as Afghan citizen card holders. Tonight, a seismic scientific breakthrough. Listen to that. Scientists have announced that they have brought back an animal that has not walked on planet Earth in at least 10,000 years. That is the dire wolf. Colossal Biosciences made the big announcement today. The pups Remus and Romulus were born in October and are being kept in a secure 2,000-acre enclosure in an undisclosed location. ABC News Live Prime was granted exclusive access inside the lab ahead of the big announcement. And our full story from Maria Villarreal will air tomorrow night on ABC News Live Prime. Looking forward to that. Coming up, the small plane skidding 100 feet off the runway while trying to land. The harrowing moments caught on camera. And Americans are betting big bucks on everything from college basketball to overseas cricket. For some, it has proved too hard to stop. In tonight's Prime Focus, a look at the rise in sports betting.
Gambling's the only addiction where you can convince yourself that continuing the very pattern that got you into that situation will cure it.
Welcome back. During March Madness alone, Americans will gamble an estimated $3 billion, and there are live sports every day. The gamblers wage on NBA playoffs, football, baseball, and for some, addiction is a real and acute problem. In tonight's Prime Focus, our DeMarco Morgan looks at the rise in sports betting and the real lives caught in the middle of the rush to win it all.
Every year, March Madness draws millions of viewers and billions of dollars of wagers placed on the games. For many, the thrill of scoring a big payout is just as important as their favorite team winning it all. But underneath the bonus bets and multi-leg parlays, a financial pressure is growing on millions of people to keep gambling.
How big of a problem is this? By sheer number of people impacted, I think that we're on a trajectory to see the worst epidemic of addiction that the world has ever seen. Wow.
Sports betting is big business. The American Gaming Association estimates $3.1 billion will be wagered at sportsbooks this year during the NCAA tournament.
Gambling's the only addiction where you can convince yourself that continuing the very pattern that got you into that situation will cure it.
Professor Stephen Master knows the sports gambling world well. He teaches classes on sports gambling at NYU.
I don't think that FanDuel and DraftKings wants, or any of those big operators want you to lose everything. They want you to win because then they'll keep coming back.
And worked as a consultant for all the major betting platforms. Online sports betting is relatively new. Since 2018, 37 states and Washington, D.C. have legalized online sports gambling.
The genesis of it was Adam Silver wrote an op-ed in November of 2014 in the New York Times, and he was the first active commissioner to write something about sports bet wasn't completely negative and saying that it'll never happen. Times have changed, and he thought it needed a fresh look and a new perspective.
And sports fans can't avoid the sports books, as the University of Bristol study finds that up to 20% of every game is spent watching gambling ads.
DraftKings. Now, I know it's the Super Bowl and all, but everyone gets a free bet?
DraftKings and other gambling platforms use major stars to help boost their profile.
The sales pitches were very aggressive. If they give someone an offer and they lose money on that first bet or the first couple bets, that was okay because the lifetime value of that fan, presumably, they would be a loyal customer, hopefully, and that they would make money.
All right, Lisa, how did we get here?
Oh man, I don't know. I'm like trying to go back. It's been a couple of years since in the making of getting here.
There was a point where he was depositing, what, roughly $60,000 or more?
That the subpoenas showed us after, yes, when I looked, yeah.
And you had no clue?
No, my jaw dropped.
For people like Lisa D'Alessandro, gambling ruined her life and her marriage.
You saw the money was no longer there. You said, I gotta go.
Yeah, I was scared.
D'Alessandro is suing DraftKings, not because she was a gambler, but because her husband gambled away their life's savings on the app.
And you lost $900,000.
Yes, and we're not talking about the recycled winnings.
According to the complaint, which doesn't name Lisa's husband, he was allegedly depositing anywhere from $30,000 to $140,000 a month to gamble on DraftKings.
Why go after DraftKings and not your ex-husband?
So it's not about going after my ex-husband. It's about what DraftKings did to me by allowing him to use funds that weren't his. I was in the hospital giving birth to my son John, Super Bowl weekend, of 2023. My ex wanted access to gamble, and so he talked to his VIP host, boom, 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 while I'm giving birth to my son.
The lawsuit alleges that her husband was encouraged by so-called VIP hosts, DraftKings employees who are assigned to big spenders to keep them gambling, and at one point offering him Apple products, free vacations, and DraftKings branded items.
So what makes DraftKings' actions illegal?
Our complaint alleges that DraftKings violated the New Jersey Consumer Fraud Act, which, as it was amended in August 2022, prohibits abusive business practices.
But couldn't they argue, we didn't make him do it, we didn't make him spend all the money?
Oh, they can argue it, and they will argue that. My argument is not in this case, and in no case, is it that the gambler is 0% responsible, that he has no responsibility. But the argument by the casinos that they have no responsibility isn't correct either.
DraftKings responded to Lisa's lawsuit with a motion to dismiss and alleging that the plaintiffs were not the direct consumer of the app, a quote requirement under the New Jersey Consumer Fraud Act. In a statement to ABC News, DraftKings said in part that in this case, Lisa was not a DraftKings customer, and the company has no legal obligation or involvement in this personal family matter. They continued by saying that they are committed to providing the best possible experience for customers and take that responsibility seriously, while, quote, upholding the highest standards of compliance and responsible gaming in every jurisdiction where we operate.
How common is a story like this?
Unfortunately, it is extremely common. It has become almost my exclusive practice. Almost all of my cases at this point involve predatory gambling practices. I receive a phone call or an email from an addicted gambler or the family of an addicted gambler almost every day.
So what was a normal day for you when you were addicted?
Well, I'd wake up and I'd check my phone instantly. It was a shot of adrenaline because I'd placed bets the night before on Chinese basketball, Japanese baseball, Korean baseball, pretty much anything in Asia that was on. And I'd wake up and I'd either find out good or bad news. Either way, my next step was to go and start gambling basically immediately.
Rob Minnick used to be addicted to gambling. Now he's trying to help people who realize they might have a problem. He runs a website that directs people to resources and services that can help them stop gambling.
So in total, how much money did you lose?
So I'm asked that question all the time, and I hope that you forgive me for giving you a roundabout answer. The reason that I never answer directly is because I know there's a young man or woman watching this right now that's in the same boat that I was in 3-4 years ago. And if I give you a number, what they're gonna think if they've lost less than that number, I'm not that bad. He's the addict, I'm not. So I like to kind of say that I've gone into debt 6 times over 6 years to the point that I was working 80-hour weeks for months to pay it off.
As more states move to legalize online sports gambling, Rob believes there's even more reason for him to speak up about what he went through.
Do you think this industry should be regulated at a higher level?
Absolutely. But if you look at the way it's advertised, it's basically the most unregulated advertising that exists in the world. You look at the stock market, if you see a commercial for Robinhood, Schwab, there's a big disclaimer that says you could lose your money if you buy this product. You look at a gambling commercial, and it says, hey loser, if you messed up, give us a call. It's a very, very different proposition when you look at it like that.
Some are paying very dearly. Our thanks to DeMarco for that. Coming up, another Women's March Madness is in the books. We go by the numbers. And you know the saying, slow and steady wins the race. The tortoise, now a first-time mother at 100 years old. Welcome back, everyone. You may not know it from the final score, but Sunday night's women's NCAA basketball championship actually stayed pretty close until near the end of the second quarter. So how did the game stack up against last year's match, highlighting the awesome skills of Caitlin Clark? We break it down tonight by the numbers. Like they did all tournament long, UConn wound up routing their opponent, South Carolina, 82-59. For UConn, it was a record-extending 12th national title, but their first since 2016, their longest drought, if you can even call it that, since their dynasty began 30 years ago. The game was a rematch of the 2022 championship game, which UConn lost. In fact, it remains the only championship game UConn has ever lost. It was little surprise that the finals featured both UConn and South Carolina this year. The teams, after all, had a combined record of 72-7. Without the wattage of Caitlin Clark, however, the women's Final Four ratings dropped 64% this year from last, when Clark was playing for Iowa, which lost in the championship game. Last year's women's finals even outdrew the TV audience of the men's finals by nearly 25%. Coming up, a war movie is about to hit theaters. What's unique about it? No background stories and no musical score. We talked to the co-directors of Warfare. And you didn't need documents, but you needed cash, and lots of it. How the law caught up with 2 border protection officers in Southern California and what they're accused of next. A small plane skids off of a runway, crashing into a bay. Federal agents accused of accepting bribes to let migrants cross the border and becoming first-time parents at almost 100 years old. These stories and more in tonight's rundown.
A dangerous landing in Oregon, sending a plane skidding off the runway into the water, injuring everyone on board.
Single private jet that's crashed, 5 passengers on. There is injuries.
The small aircraft seen here overshooting the landing at Southwest Oregon Regional Airport. The plane then crashing into Coos Bay. Rescue workers pulling passengers to safety on a boat. The FAA is now investigating what caused the plane to skid off the runway. 2 Border Patrol agents were charged with accepting bribes to allow migrants to be smuggled into the U.S., according to charging documents. The men assigned to the San Ysidro Port of Entry in California were allegedly caught on surveillance camera, letting more than a dozen people through without proper documentation. The men allegedly deposited $46,000 over a 6-month period, according to federal prosecutors. A missing 2-year-old boy was rescued using infrared technology. The toddler vanished from his Michigan home wearing only a diaper. Michigan State Police helicopter located the boy using an infrared camera. The toddler's heat signature showed that he was in a ditch near I-94. State troopers on the ground found the boy curled up, awake and alert.
Now look, give me the brush.
But I want to help.
Well, that's what I'm afraid of. Now hand it over. No, the handle first.
Jay North, who starred as the tow-headed mischief maker on TV's Dennis the Menace for 4 seasons, has died. North died Sunday at his home in Lake Butler, Florida, after battling colon cancer. He was 73. North was just 6 when he was cast as a smiling troublemaker in the CBS sitcom. He is survived by his 3rd wife, Cindy, and 3 stepdaughters. New royal photos mark King Charles III and Queen Camilla's 20th wedding anniversary, which is on Wednesday. The photos of the couple were taken during their state visit to Italy at Villa Walkonski in Rome. It's never too late to become a parent, at least for these tortoises. A pair of nearly 100-year-old critically endangered tortoises have welcomed 4 baby hatchlings at the Philadelphia Zoo, a first in the zoo's more than 150-year history. The mom has been a resident of the Philly Zoo since April 1932 and is estimated to be 97 years old. Abrazo, the hatchling's father, is an estimated 96 years old, according to zoo officials. The 4 hatchlings, which have yet to be named, will make their public debut at the Philadelphia Zoo's Reptile and Amphibian House on April 23rd.
How much money would you pay for your chance to become a millionaire? Mega Millions is changing the game to increase the jackpot. Officials say players' odds of winning will be increased from 1 in 303 million to 1 in 290 million, but the price will more than double, rising to $5 per ticket. The change takes effect after tomorrow night's drawing. It's been billed as one of the most intense and unflinching war films in recent memory. Warfare by A24 Films is inspired by an actual covert mission in Iraq from November 2006 that went horribly awry. Co-directed by Ray Mendoza and Alex Garland, who was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay for his 2015 hit Ex Machina. Warfare is a real-time descent into the fog of a battle from the point of view of the Navy SEALs who lived through it. Let's take a look.
How's it going?
Going well.
Alpha 2, we might have guys starting to move on our position.
Copy, we're getting a buildup of activity here too.
Yeah, I definitely see weapons at this point.
Yeah, we have definite massing.
Alex Garland and Ray Mendoza, thank you both so much for joining us. Let's start with you, Ray. You were a Navy SEAL on that mission. What made you decide that this should be reenacted in film?
It was a desire that was always there. I mean, I didn't know or when I was going to do it. The desire to do it, Elliot doesn't remember, played by Cosmo Jarvis. He doesn't recall. So he's always had a lot of questions. And once I got into the movie industry, I realized that potentially this could be a medium for me to tell that story for him, a visual medium. Meeting Alex, that opportunity finally presented itself. Yeah, everything was aligned. It seemed like the right time to do it.
And Alex, you directed last year's film, Civil War. Warfare is quite different. There's no score, no independent background stories. Why'd you take that approach?
Because we were trying to show real combat as faithfully as we could, and that means in some ways real life as faithfully as we could. There's no score in real life, and a lot of the cinematic devices we have are very cool and they make really entertaining films, but they're not really allied to truth. So we were doing what we could to strip all that stuff away.
And before shooting, you put the cast through an actual kind of reenactment of a training, right? That the actual Navy SEALs would go through. Why was that important? What was the goal?
Yeah, well, the goal was to expose them to elements. Each group had kind of a different objective for each one. For example, Will Poulter, Charles Melton, and Joseph Quinn were kind of the leaders of the group, and who they were portraying were the leaders of our platoon. So I wanted to expose them to elements of leadership and the burden of leadership and kind of what that feels like, so that they could all fall back on something to use for their performance. And there's no way I could make them into Navy SEALs. So I think the strategy and the time that we had, it was more just like exposing them to these elements of what failure is, relying on someone else, putting the team before yourself.
And Alex, did your approach change at all when you're working alongside someone who actually lived this experience?
Oh, it was completely different from anything I've ever done. I mean, if for no other reason than Ray was doing most of the stuff that people think of when they think of directing a movie, which is communicating with actors and helping them reach the right point in their performance. And I played no part in that because I have no memory of this incident. I wasn't there, but the guy that was there was standing right on set, so they just went straight to him, and that's how we set it up. And it worked. It worked really well. It was very smooth and just an easy collaboration, trying to do something very difficult, but the actual process in a way was really natural and smooth.
I thought as a viewer, things seem like, okay, this is taking a lot of time, deliberate, intentional time to develop, but I wasn't bored by that. It actually served to build up the suspense as far as what are we waiting for to happen. Was that deliberate?
What we assumed and hoped was that viewers would recognize quite quickly that this film is not working like a normal movie, and its timings are different. And what they're recognizing is truth. They're recognizing authenticity. And that gives it a funny kind of energy, a funny kind of sense of dread, or a sense that anything can happen in the way that anything can happen in real life. And so it's not like watching a normal film.
It's not, right.
It's just a different feel.
Much different. Okay, but appreciated. Alex, Ray, we thank you both so much for your time and for bringing us this. Warfare by A24 Films, co-directed by Alex Garland and Ray Mendoza, will be in theaters starting this Friday, April 11th. There is a newly crowned king of the NHL. People thought it could not be done, but Washington Capitals star Alex Ovechkin has passed the great one Wayne Gretzky to become the NHL's all-time goal leader. Ovechkin scored number 895 against the Islanders and broke one of sports' all-time records. Here's our Lara Spencer.
Ovechkin shoots, he scores! He scores! Number 895!
It was a record-breaking afternoon for hockey all-star Alex Ovechkin, cementing his place as king of the rink.
Is the greatest goal scorer in National Hockey League history.
Ovechkin surpassing the all-time scoring record set more than 30 years ago by the great one, Wayne Gretzky, who was on hand to mark the milestone.
I can tell you firsthand, I know how hard it is to get to 894. 895 is pretty special. They say records are made to be broken, but I'm not sure who's going to get more goals than that. Alex, I said I'd be the first guy to shake your hand when you broke the record. And I wore this pin.
Ovechkin's wife, mom, and kids leaping to their feet. And after the goal, Ovechkin taking a celebratory slide. This photo capturing the moment as if floating over the ice and into the history books. The future Hall of Famer thanking everyone who helped him reach the top of the mountain.
Without my boys, the whole organization, the fans, the trainers, coaches, I would never stand there, and obviously I would never pass a great one.
Fans in the arena and around the world celebrating the new GOAT. The 39-year-old Washington Capitals captain still in disbelief after the game.
It's something crazy, and I just said it, I'm probably going to need a couple more days or maybe a couple weeks to realize. I'm very proud for myself. I'm very proud for my family, for all my teammates that helped me to reach that milestone.
Love to see that enthusiasm. Congratulations to him. That is our show for this hour. I'm Linsey Davis. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. Thanks so much for streaming with us.